There's someone breathing behind your wall. The plumber's words hung in the air of my kitchen like smoke from an extinguished candle. I set down my coffee cup, certain I had misheard him. Mike Torres stood in the doorway, his weathered hands gripping a wrench, his face pale beneath the tan of 30 years working under the Carolina sun. "I'm sorry," I managed. "Mr. Carter, I've been fixing pipes for most of my life. I know what water sounds like. I know what air in the lines sounds like. What I heard in your library wall." He paused, swallowing hard. "That's not pipes. That's breathing. Human breathing. I am Thomas Carter, 61 years old, retired federal judge, widower. I have lived in this house on Magnolia Drive for 40 years. It is a Charleston plantation home built in 1824, filled with creaking floors and old memories. My wife Eleanor died 5 years ago. My eldest son Daniel, a successful criminal defense attorney, still lives with me. My youngest son Benjamin disappeared without a trace shortly after his mother's funeral. I know every sound this old house makes. The settling of the foundation on cold nights, the whisper of wind through the ancient oak outside my bedroom window, the particular groan of the third stair from the top. But breathing behind the walls? That was impossible. "Show me," I said. Mike led me through the hallway toward the library, a room that had once been Eleanor's favorite. She would spend hours there, curled in the leather armchair by the window, reading novels and watching the garden. After her death, Daniel had claimed the space for his legal work, installing new shelves and a heavy oak desk. I rarely entered anymore. The library door was closed. Mike hesitated before it, as if the wood itself might bite him. "I was checking the pipes behind the east wall," he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "The ones that connect to the upstairs bathroom." That's when I heard it. Slow, steady, like someone sleeping, or someone trying very hard not to be heard. I reached for the door handle. My hand, I noticed, was trembling. The library looked exactly as Daniel had arranged it. Shelves lined with legal texts, the mahogany desk positioned to catch the morning light, Eleanor's old armchair pushed into the corner and draped with a white sheet like a ghost. The room smelled of leather and old paper and something else, something faintly chemical that I couldn't identify. "Where?" I asked. Mike pointed to the east wall, the one covered floor to ceiling with bookshelves. "Behind there. Press your ear to the wall, near the bottom shelf. You'll hear it." I crossed the room slowly, my footsteps muffled by the Persian rug that Eleanor had chosen on our 20th anniversary trip to Istanbul. The bookshelves loomed above me, filled with Daniel's law journals and case files. I knelt down, my knees protesting the movement, and pressed my ear against the wall. At first, I heard nothing. Then soft, rhythmic, unmistakable the sound of someone breathing. My hand went numb. The room seemed to tilt. Behind this wall, behind these books, behind whatever barrier my son had constructed, someone was alive. Someone was waiting. I pulled back from the wall as if it had burned me. Mike Torres stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of fear and validation. "You heard it," he said. It wasn't a question. There has to be an explanation. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, thin and desperate. Old houses have strange acoustics. Sound travels through pipes. Through, Mr. Carter. Mike's tone was gentle but firm. "I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've heard every sound a house can make. That's not acoustics. That's a person." I rose to my feet, my mind racing through possibilities, each one more improbable than the last. A homeless person who had somehow found their way into the walls? An animal? A radio left on somewhere? Its batteries slowly dying? None of it made sense. And beneath the desperate rationalizations, a darker thought was forming, one I refused to acknowledge. "I need to look behind this wall," I said. Mike nodded slowly. "I noticed something when I was working earlier. The baseboard near the corner, it's been cut and reattached. Recently, from the look of it, someone's been accessing what's behind here." We moved toward the corner he indicated. I knelt down, ignoring the pain in my knees, and examined the baseboard. He was right. The wood had been carefully cut, the edges sanded smooth, the paint touched up to hide the seams. But if you knew what to look for, the lines were visible, a door disguised as a wall. I was reaching for the edge when I heard the front door open. "Dad? Whose van is in the driveway?" "Daniel." I straightened quickly, my heart hammering. Mike shot me a questioning look, but I shook my head slightly. Not now. Not until I understood what was happening. "In the library," I called out, forcing my voice to remain steady. "The plumber is here, checking on those noisy pipes you mentioned." Daniel appeared in the doorway, his court suit impeccable, his briefcase in hand. At 36, he had grown into the image of professional success, tall, well-groomed, with Eleanor's dark eyes and my father's strong jaw. He smiled at Mike Torres with the practiced warmth of a man who made his living persuading juries. "Ah, the pipes. Yes, they've been making quite a racket lately. Old houses, you know." "Fine," I said. "Just tired. Long day." Daniel's gaze swept the room, lingering for a moment on the east wall before returning to me. Something flickered in his eyes, concern, suspicion. I couldn't tell. "Well, I'll let you get back to it. I have briefs to review." He nodded to Mike. "Let me know if you find anything unusual." He left, his footsteps retreating down the hallway toward the kitchen. Mike and I stood in silence until we heard the refrigerator door open and close. "That's your son?" Mike asked quietly. "He seems." Mike paused, choosing his words carefully. "Interested in what we're doing." I looked at the east wall, at the careful cuts in the baseboard, at the shelves full of legal texts that had been installed after Eleanor's death. Daniel had renovated this room himself, insisting that he needed a proper workspace, refusing to let contractors into the house. "Mr. Torres," I said slowly, "I need you to come back tomorrow. When my son is at work. Can you do that?" Mike met my eyes, and in his gaze I saw a reflection of my own growing horror. "I'll be here at 9, he said. "And Mr. Carter? Whatever's behind that wall, someone put it there. Someone who knows this house very well." He left me alone in the library, surrounded by books and shadows and the soft, steady sound of breathing that I could no longer pretend not to hear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the darkness of my bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the old house settling around me. But now every creak, every groan, every whisper of wind seemed sinister, pregnant with secrets I had been too blind to see. At 2:17 in the morning, I heard footsteps. They came from below, from the direction of the library. Soft, careful footsteps, the kind made by someone who didn't want to be heard. I held my breath, straining to listen. A door opened. Not the front door, not the back door, but something else, a sound I couldn't identify. A sliding click, followed by a hollow thump, then silence. I slipped out of bed and crept to my bedroom door, opening it just enough to peer into the hallway. The house was dark, except for a faint glow coming from downstairs from the library. I moved silently down the stairs, grateful for the years I had spent learning which boards creaked and which stayed silent. At the bottom, I pressed myself against the wall and looked toward the library door. It was open. And through the gap, I could see Daniel. He was standing at the east wall, holding a tray. On the tray were items I couldn't make out from this distance. Food, perhaps, and a glass of water. As I watched, he reached toward the baseboard, touched something I couldn't see, and a section of the wall swung inward. Light spilled from the hidden opening, harsh, fluorescent light that seemed wrong in this house of antique lamps and crystal chandeliers. Daniel stepped through the gap, the tray balanced carefully in his hands, and disappeared from view. The wall swung closed behind him. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in the shadows of my own home. Minutes, perhaps. Long enough for Daniel to re-emerge, the tray now empty except for a plate with remnants of food that had been eaten by someone behind that wall. He closed the hidden door, replaced the baseboard, and turned off the library light. I barely had time to retreat up the stairs before he passed through the hallway, returning to his bedroom as if nothing had happened. I lay awake until dawn, my mind churning with impossible questions. Someone was living behind the wall of my library. Someone Daniel was feeding, caring for, keeping hidden. Someone whose breathing Mike Torres had heard through inches of plaster and wood. Who was it? And why had my son built a prison in our family home? The answers, I realized, might destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. But I had spent 32 years as a judge, separating truth from lies. And I could not, would not, look away from this. Tomorrow, when Daniel left for work, I would find out what he was hiding, and I would face whatever truth waited behind that wall. The morning light felt different as I sat in the kitchen, pretending to drink coffee while Daniel prepared for work. Every gesture he made, pouring cream, checking his phone, adjusting his tie, seemed laden with hidden meaning. This was my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the teenager I had watched graduate valedictorian, the man who had wept at his mother's funeral and promised to take care of me in my old age. This was also, perhaps, a monster. "You're quiet this morning," Daniel observed, glancing at me over his coffee cup. "Still feeling unwell?" "Just thinking about your mother," I said. It wasn't entirely a lie. Daniel's expression softened. "I miss her too, Dad. Every day." He paused. "Do you remember what she used to say? About keeping the family together no matter what?" "I remember. That's what I'm trying to do. Keep us together. Keep us safe." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Some people don't understand the sacrifices that requires." He left for work at 8:30, his Mercedes disappearing down Magnolia Drive toward the Charleston courthouse where he would spend the day defending clients accused of crimes. The irony was not lost on me. Alone at last, I retreated to the small study where Eleanor had kept her personal documents. It was the one room Daniel hadn't touched after her death. He claimed it was too painful to enter, too full of memories. Now I wondered if that was the truth, or simply another lie, and what I was beginning to suspect was a lifetime of them. Eleanor had been organized to the point of obsession. Files labeled by year, by category, by subject. Bank statements in chronological order. Correspondence sorted alphabetically. If she had known something about Daniel, she would have left evidence. I found it in a folder labeled Family Concerns. Inside were handwritten notes in Eleanor's careful script, dated over the final year of her life. The first entry was from February, about 14 months before her death. "Something is wrong with Daniel. He watches Benjamin with such coldness, not anger, something worse. Calculation. As if B is a problem to be solved rather than a brother to be loved." The entries continued, growing more alarmed as the months passed. March. D asked about the will today, specifically about what would happen to B. Share, if something happened to him. I pretended not to understand the question, but I understood perfectly. June. Found D in my study, looking through financial documents. He claimed he was searching for old tax records. The records he wanted were locked in my safe. He doesn't know the combination, or at least, I thought he didn't. September. D has hired someone to upgrade the library. He won't let me see the plans. He says it's a surprise. I don't like surprises anymore. November. I've changed the will. Benjamin will receive 70% now. I haven't told anyone, not even Thomas. I'm afraid of what D might do if he found out. The final entry was dated 3 weeks before Eleanor's death. "If something happens to me, look at Daniel. He has become someone I don't recognize, someone I'm afraid of. My beautiful boy is gone, and something else is wearing his face. Protect Benjamin, please. Whoever reads this, protect my Benjamin." I sat in Eleanor's study, holding her words, and felt the world I had known crumble into dust. The memories came unbidden now. Fragments of the past, rearranging themselves into a new and terrible pattern. Eleanor's funeral had been held on a gray March afternoon, the kind of day that felt like the sky itself was grieving. The church was packed. She had been beloved in Charleston, known for her charity work, and her warmth and her ability to make everyone feel welcome in her home. I had sat in the front pew, numb with shock, barely able to process that the woman I had loved for 40 years was gone. A fall down the stairs, the doctors had said. A tragic accident. These old houses with their steep staircases and worn carpets, it happened more often than people realized. Daniel had handled everything. The funeral arrangements, the reception, the endless stream of sympathy cards and casserole dishes. He had been a rock, everyone said. So strong for his father, such a devoted son. Benjamin had sat beside me at the funeral, silent and pale. He hadn't cried not once, but his hands had trembled throughout the service. At the reception afterward, I found him standing alone in the garden, staring at Eleanor's white roses. She knew something was wrong, he had said, so quietly I almost missed it. She tried to tell me, but I didn't listen. I thought she was just being overprotective. What do you mean? I had asked. Benjamin had turned to look at me then, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. She was afraid of him, Dad. She was afraid of Daniel. Before I could respond, Daniel had appeared at my elbow, smooth and solicitous. Dad, the Hendersons want to pay their respects. And Benjamin, his gaze had flickered to his brother with something that might have been contempt. You look unwell. Benjamin had left without another word. 1 week later, he was gone. The note he left was brief and strange. Dad, I have to go. Please don't look for me. I'm sorry I can't explain. Take care of yourself. Benjamin. Daniel had been devastated, or had performed devastation so convincingly that I never thought to question it. He had helped me search Benjamin's room for clues, had accompanied me to the police station to file a missing person report, had hired private investigators who found nothing. Some people just need to disappear, Daniel had said, after the investigators gave up. Benjamin was always sensitive. Mom's death probably broke something in him. When he's ready, he'll come back. I had believed him. I had trusted my son, and I had stopped looking. Now, sitting in Eleanor's study with her warnings in my hands, I understood the truth. Benjamin hadn't left. Benjamin had never left. The house felt different now, as if the walls themselves were watching me. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, seeing everything anew. The library where Daniel spent his evenings, supposedly working on cases. The basement door that was always locked, the key kept only on Daniel's ring. The garden shed that Daniel had padlocked after Eleanor's death, claiming it held painful memories he wasn't ready to face. Painful memories. Locked doors. Hidden spaces. I returned to Eleanor's study and searched more thoroughly. Behind a row of novels on the bottom shelf, novels I had given her for various birthdays and anniversaries, I found a leather-bound Bible. It was her grandmother's, passed down through generations of her family. Eleanor had treasured it but rarely opened it, preferring the newer translation she used for daily reading. Inside the Bible, pressed between the pages of Psalms, was another letter. This one was in Benjamin's handwriting. Dad, I have to go. Please don't look for me. I'm sorry I can't explain. Take care of yourself. Benjamin. The same words. The exact same words as the note Benjamin had supposedly left when he disappeared. But this letter was dated 2 months before Benjamin vanished, before Eleanor's death, before the funeral, before any of it happened. Someone had written this letter early. Someone had prepared Benjamin's disappearance in advance, and that someone had hidden the original draft in a place they were certain I would never look. My hands were shaking as I compared the two documents. The handwriting was Benjamin's, or an excellent forgery. The paper was identical, but the dates were impossible, unless Benjamin hadn't written either letter, unless someone had forced him to write them, weeks before he disappeared, knowing exactly what was coming. That night, I lay awake again, listening to the sounds of the house. At 2:14 in the morning, Almost exactly the same time as before, I heard Daniel's footsteps moving toward the library. I didn't follow him this time. I didn't need to. I knew now what was behind that wall. My son. My youngest son, who had never left Charleston, who had never abandoned his family, who had been imprisoned in his own home for 5 years while I grieved for a disappearance that never happened. Benjamin was alive, and tomorrow, with Mike Torres's help, I was going to find him. Mike Torres arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, as promised. Daniel had left for a full day of court appearances, a high-profile fraud case that would keep him occupied until evening. We had hours to work, but every minute felt precious. "I've been thinking about this all night," Mike said as I led him to the library. Whoever built that hidden space knew what they were doing. Soundproofing, ventilation, probably plumbing too. This wasn't improvised. This was planned. "My son renovated this room himself," I said. "About 5 years ago, right after his mother died." Mike's expression tightened, but he said nothing. We started with Daniel's desk. It felt like a violation, rifling through my own son's belongings. The top drawers contained ordinary supplies, pens, legal pads, paper clips. The second drawer held case files, none of which seemed relevant. The third drawer was locked. "Can you open it?" I asked. Mike produced a small toolkit from his bag. "I've picked a few locks in my day. Old houses, lost keys, it comes with the territory." 2 minutes later, the drawer slid open. Inside was a folder labeled Household Expenses. I flipped it open and found receipts, hundreds of them, organized by month and year, stretching back 5 years. At first glance, they seemed ordinary. Grocery store purchases, hardware supplies, utility payments. Then I looked closer. The grocery receipts showed quantities that made no sense for a household of 2. Hundreds of dollars per week at Harris Teeter. Far more food than Daniel and I could possibly consume. The items were basic bread, cheese, canned goods, bottled water. But the amounts were excessive. Unless Daniel was feeding someone else, the hardware receipts were even more damning. From a store called Burke's Supply, dated 5 years ago. Padlock. 24,99. Chain. Diz. A $8. 0. Soundproofing foam. 6 panels. $42. A handwritten note was clipped to the receipt. JB March. Delivery. Confirmed. JB. Jonathan Blake, the mysterious author name I would later discover. Or perhaps just initials that meant something only Daniel understood. I photographed every receipt with my phone, my hands trembling with each click. "Mr. Carter." Mike's voice came from across the room. "You need to see this." He was kneeling by a tall black filing cabinet I had never paid attention to. The bottom drawer was open, revealing stacks of manila folders with handwritten labels. "Medical supplies." Mike read. "Maintenance schedule. Contingency protocols." I crossed the room and pulled out the folder labeled Medical Supplies. Inside were receipts for items no ordinary household would need. Antibiotics, sedatives, vitamin supplements, first aid supplies in bulk. All purchased with cash. All from pharmacies outside Charleston. The maintenance schedule folder contained a calendar, handwritten, detailing a routine that spanned 5 years. 2 a.m. Food delivery. 6 a.m. Water refill. 10 a.m. Waste removal. 2 p.m. Check. Ventilation. 6 p.m. Evening meal. 10 p.m. Final check. Every day. For 5 years. My son had maintained this schedule while living under the same roof as me, while eating breakfast with me, while asking about my day and pretending to be a devoted son. "There's more," Mike said quietly. He handed me a folder labeled JB Manuscripts. Inside were printed pages, hundreds of them, marked with editorial notes in Daniel's handwriting. The top page bore a title, The Silence Between, by Jonathan Blake. I recognized that name. Jonathan Blake was a best-selling author, a reclusive literary sensation who had published 5 novels in 5 years, each one acclaimed for its profound understanding of human suffering. No one had ever met him. No one had ever photographed him. He communicated only through email, citing severe social anxiety. "Oh God," I breathed. The manuscripts weren't written by a mysterious hermit. They were written by my son, my imprisoned son, forced to produce novels in captivity while Daniel collected the royalties and the praise. Benjamin had been writing his way through 5 years of darkness, and Daniel had been selling every word. We spent the next 3 hours documenting everything. The filing cabinet alone contained enough evidence to fill a courtroom. Bank statements showed a hidden account with $2.3 million to the accumulated royalties from Jonathan Blake's literary career. Wire transfer records traced the money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands before it returned, laundered, to accounts Daniel controlled. I found the contractor's invoice for the library renovation. Marcus Webb, a name I didn't recognize, had been paid $75,000 in cash for specialized construction. The invoice listed materials that included concrete blocks, industrial ventilation, a reinforced steel door, and custom soundproofing installation. He hadn't just built a hidden room. He had built a prison cell. "This Marcus Webb," Mike said, studying the invoice. "If he's still around, he could be charged as an accomplice. If he's still around." I thought of Daniel's thoroughness, his attention to detail, his willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect his secrets. Or he could be another victim. We moved to the hidden door Mike had identified earlier. With the house empty and hours of daylight remaining, there was no reason to wait. The mechanism was clever. A pressure point hidden behind a fake electrical outlet, combined with a latch disguised as a baseboard nail. Mike figured it out in minutes. His years of experience with old houses serving us well. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, though I was anything but. The wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage lit by a single bare bulb. The walls were concrete, unpainted, and the air smelled of recycled ventilation and human habitation. A steep staircase led downward into darkness. "There's a basement level," Mike said, surprised. "That's not on any of the house plans I've seen." Daniel built this from scratch, I realized. He excavated beneath the library and created an entirely new space. Right under my feet, right under the room where I read my morning paper. We descended the stairs slowly, the concrete cold beneath my shoes. At the bottom, another door, this one steel, with a heavy lock that required a key I didn't have. But through the door, muffled by inches of metal and soundproofing, I could hear something. A voice. Humming. A tune I recognized. A lullaby Eleanor used to sing when the boys were small. "Benjamin," I called out, my voice cracking. "Benjamin, can you hear me?" The humming stopped. A moment of silence. Then, from behind the door, a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. "Dad? Dad, is that you? Please, please tell me I'm not dreaming again." I pressed my palm against the cold steel, tears streaming down my face. "It's me, son. It's really me. I'm going to get you out of here. I promise." The key. Benjamin's voice was hoarse, desperate. "Daniel keeps the key on his ring. He never lets it out of his sight. You'll need to." "I'll find a way," I said. "I swear to God, I'll find a way." But even as I spoke, I heard the sound I had been dreading. A car pulling into the driveway. Daniel was home. We barely made it back upstairs before the front door opened. Mike slipped out the back, promising to call me later, while I retreated to the kitchen and pretended to be preparing lunch. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the bread knife. "Dad?" Daniel's voice echoed through the house. "Whose van was that?" I saw it leaving as I pulled in. "Plumber," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Same one from yesterday." He found the source of the noise, old pipes. Just like you said. Nothing to worry about. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, his eyes scanning the room with that sharp intelligence I had always admired and now feared. Good. Those old pipes have been bothering me for weeks. I thought your trial was supposed to last all day. Continuance. The judge had a family emergency. Daniel opened the refrigerator and retrieved a bottle of water. What have you been up to? Reading. Thinking about your mother. The usual. Croof. Croof 4. Croof. Daniel's expression softened or seemed to. I miss her too, Dad. Every day. We ate lunch together. A grotesque parody of normalcy. I listened to Daniel talk about his case, about the incompetence of the prosecution, about his plans for the upcoming legal conference in Atlanta. All the while, my mind was racing through possibilities. I couldn't confront him directly. He was younger, stronger, and clearly willing to do terrible things to protect his secrets. If I accused him without proof, without witnesses, without a plan, I needed help. I needed evidence that would stand up in court. I needed to be as meticulous as Daniel himself. That evening, after Daniel retreated to the library for his nightly routine, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Mike Torres, confirming what we had found and asking him to document everything in writing. The second was to Helen Brooks, Eleanor's closest friend and our neighbor for 30 years. She answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting. Thomas, she said, her voice tight with emotion. I've been hoping you would call. There are things I need to tell you. Things I should have told you years ago. About Daniel? A pause. About Eleanor. About the night she died. About what I saw from my window that I was too afraid to report. The third call was to Detective Sarah Chen, a former colleague from my judicial days who now worked with the FBI's Joint Task Force on Financial Crimes. I gave her the broad strokes: hidden bank accounts, shell companies, possible kidnapping, and asked her to meet me the following day. Thomas, she said carefully, you're describing serious federal crimes. Are you certain about this? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Then I'll see you tomorrow. And Thomas, don't do anything until I get there. If what you're telling me is true, your son is extremely dangerous. I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling of my bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of Daniel moving through the house below. Extremely dangerous. My son, the baby I had held in the delivery room 36 years ago, the child who had run to me with scraped knees and broken toys, the young man who had made me so proud at his law school graduation. Extremely dangerous. I closed my eyes and waited for morning. James Morrison's law office occupied the second floor of a historic building on Broad Street, its windows overlooking the church where Eleanor and I had been married 41 years earlier. James had been Eleanor's attorney for decades, a trusted family friend who had drafted her will and managed her modest investments. Thomas. He rose from behind his desk as I entered, his face creased with concern. Your message said it was urgent. What's wrong? I closed the door behind me and sat down in the leather chair facing his desk. I need to know about Eleanor's will. The real will. The one she signed 3 weeks before she died. James went pale. For a long moment, he said nothing, his hands gripping the edge of his desk as if to steady himself. How did you find out? He finally asked. Eleanor left notes, hidden in her study. She wrote about changing the will, about being afraid of Daniel, about I stopped, my voice breaking. James, did she come to you? Did she change the terms? James rose and walked to his window, staring out at the church steeple. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with guilt. She came to see me on February 23rd, 3 weeks before her death, just as you said. She wanted to change the distribution, 70% to Benjamin, 30% to Daniel, she said. He paused. She said she had discovered something about Daniel, something that frightened her. She wouldn't tell me what it was, but she was insistent. She wanted Benjamin protected. And you made the changes? I drew up the new will that same day. She signed it in my office, with my secretary as witness. James turned to face me, his eyes red-rimmed. It was a legally valid document. Thomas, it should have superseded the original. Then why wasn't it executed? James's face crumpled. Because Daniel came to see me. The day after Eleanor's funeral. He had questions about the estate, about the distribution, He swallowed. He asked if there had been any recent changes to the will. I told him no. I lied to him, Thomas. I was protecting Eleanor's wishes, but something changed. A week later, he came back. This time he wasn't asking questions, he was making threats. James sat down heavily in his chair. He said he knew about the new will. He said if I didn't use the original version, the 50-50 split, he would destroy my career. He had evidence, he claimed, of ethical violations from years ago, things that could get me disbarred. Were the allegations true? Some of them. James's voice was barely a whisper. Enough of them. I was a different man 30 years ago, Thomas. I made mistakes. Daniel somehow found out about them, and he used that knowledge to control me. I sat in silence, processing this new betrayal. Daniel had not only imprisoned his brother, he had manipulated Eleanor's own attorney into nullifying her final wishes. There's more, James said. The day before she died, Eleanor came to see me again. She wanted to add a codicil, a provision that would trigger an automatic investigation if she died under suspicious circumstances. She specifically named Daniel as a person of interest. Did you draft it? James shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I was too afraid. I told her I needed time, that these things had to be done carefully. I asked her to come back the following week. He looked at me with anguish. She never got the chance. Thomas, she died the next night. And I've lived with that guilt ever since. I reached across the desk and gripped his hand. You can make it right, I said. Help me now. Testify about what you know. The new will, Daniel's threats, Eleanor's fears, all of it. James nodded slowly. I'll do whatever it takes. I failed Eleanor. I won't fail her again. James pulled a folder from his safe documents he had hidden for 5 years, too afraid to destroy but too compromised to reveal. This is everything, he said, spreading the papers across his desk. The original will, the revised version, my notes from both meetings with Eleanor, and the correspondence with Daniel afterward. I studied the revised will first. Eleanor's signature was unmistakable, the elegant loops of her E, the decisive slash of her final flourish. Beside it was the date, February 23rd, 3 weeks before her death, exactly as James had said. The terms were clear. Benjamin would receive 70% of the estate, Daniel, 30%. But more importantly, Eleanor had added a handwritten note at the bottom. I make these changes of my own free will, in full possession of my faculties, because I have concerns about my eldest son Daniel's character and intentions. Should I die before this will is properly filed, I ask that the circumstances of my death be thoroughly investigated. May God protect my boys from each other. She knew, I breathed. She knew something was wrong with Daniel, and she tried to protect Benjamin, but she didn't know how far Daniel would go. There's something else. James handed me a separate document, a phone record from Daniel's office line. Daniel called me the week before Eleanor's death. He asked hypothetical questions about contesting a will changed during the final illness of the testator. He wanted to know if such a document could be invalidated on grounds of diminished capacity. He was planning, I realized. He knew she was going to change the will, and he was already preparing his response. It gets worse. James pointed to a date on the phone record. This call was made on March 8th. Eleanor died on March 15th. A week later, the timeline crystallized in my mind like ice forming on a winter pond. Daniel had discovered Eleanor's plan to disinherit him. He had researched ways to invalidate the new will, and when legal maneuvering proved insufficient, he had taken more direct action. He had pushed his own mother down the stairs. He had watched her lie broken at the bottom, had called the paramedics, had performed the role of grieving son while her blood pooled on the hardwood floor she had polished every Sunday for 40 years. And then because she had somehow survived the fall, he had gone to the hospital and finished the job. "James," I said slowly, "I need you to gather every document you have. The wills, the phone records, the notes from your meetings with Eleanor. I'm meeting with a federal investigator tomorrow. Everything you have could help put Daniel away for the rest of his life." "Gladly." James was already moving, pulling files from drawers and safes. "I should have done this years ago, Thomas. I should have been braver. Eleanor deserved better than my cowardice." "We both failed her," I admitted. "But we can still save Benjamin, and we can still bring Daniel to justice." I left James's office with a folder thick with evidence and a heart heavy with grief. Eleanor had tried to warn us. She had seen the monster wearing her son's face, and she had fought to protect her family with the only weapons she had, legal documents and written warnings. It hadn't been enough. But perhaps, combined with everything else I had gathered, it would be enough now. That afternoon, I met Helen Brooks at her home across the lawn from mine. She was waiting on the porch with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, her hands wrapped around the porcelain as if drawing warmth from it despite the mild spring weather. "I should have come to you years ago," she said as I sat down beside her. "Eleanor made me promise to watch over the family after she was gone, but I was afraid. Daniel is a lawyer, Thomas. He knows how to destroy people who cross him." "Tell me what you saw," I said. "The night Eleanor died," Helen took a shaky breath. "It was around 11:45. I couldn't sleep, my arthritis was acting up, so I was sitting by my window, looking out at your house. I saw the kitchen light go on, then the library light. I thought nothing of it at first. Then I saw Daniel. Where was he? In the backyard. He was coming from the garden shed, and he was carrying something." Helen's voice dropped. "Something wrapped in plastic, large enough to be." She couldn't finish the sentence. "A body," I supplied quietly. Helen nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I told myself I was seeing things, that the darkness and my imagination were playing tricks. But then the ambulance came, and I heard that Eleanor had fallen, and I knew something wasn't right. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because Daniel came to see me the next day." Helen's hands trembled around her teacup. "He was so concerned, so solicitous. He asked if I had seen or heard anything unusual the night before. He said the police might have questions, and then he said..." She paused. "He said he hoped I hadn't been disturbed, that these old houses could play tricks on the eyes, that imagination could make people see things that weren't there. He was threatening you, without ever making an explicit threat. That's his genius, Thomas. He makes you doubt yourself. He makes you feel crazy for suspecting him. By the time he left, I had half convinced myself that I really had imagined the whole thing. I thought of all the times Daniel had explained away my concerns, had smoothed over inconsistencies, had made me feel foolish for asking questions. He had been doing it my entire life, I realized, managing perceptions, controlling narratives, turning reality into whatever story served him best. "Helen," I said, "I need to tell you something. Benjamin didn't disappear. He's been imprisoned in my house for 5 years. Daniel built a cell beneath the library, and he's been keeping Benjamin there, forcing him to write novels that Daniel sells under a fake name." Helen's teacup slipped from her hands and shattered on the porch floor. "Dear God," she whispered. "What did you hear?" "Crying. Late at night, when the wind was still. It seemed to come from your house, but it was so faint, I thought I was imagining it. And sometimes," she pressed a hand to her mouth, "sometimes I would see Daniel in the library window at 2 or 3 in the morning, talking to someone I couldn't see. I thought he was on the phone. I never imagined he was talking to Benjamin," I said. Through the wall of his cell, Helen began to sob great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. "I'm so sorry, Thomas. I should have said something. I should have trusted my instincts. 5 years. That poor boy has been trapped for 5 years, and I did nothing. I put my arm around her shoulders. You're doing something now, I said. You're telling the truth. And tomorrow, you're going to tell that truth to the FBI. Rachel Martinez had been our housekeeper for 15 years, arriving every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to clean, organize, and maintain the house that had become too large for Eleanor and me to manage alone. She had continued coming after Eleanor's death, her presence a comfort in the emptiness that followed. Now I understood why Daniel had insisted we keep her on. He needed someone to maintain the illusion, I explained to Detective Chen as we waited in Helen's living room. A housekeeper who came regularly, who could testify that the house was normal, that nothing unusual was happening. But he couldn't control what she saw and heard. Rachel arrived at 3 o'clock, her face drawn with anxiety. She had been reluctant to come. I knew she had called twice that morning, asking if she really needed to be there, but something in my voice had convinced her. Mr. Carter, she said as she sat down across from me. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't know anything about Rachel. I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. I know about Benjamin. I know he's been in the house this whole time. And I think you've known too. Her face crumpled. I was afraid, she whispered. Mr. Daniel said. He said, if I ever talked about what I saw, he would have me deported. My papers aren't. I'm not. She couldn't finish. You're undocumented, Chen said gently. It wasn't a question. Chen 7. Chen 7. Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. I came here 30 years ago. I raised my children here. They were born here, they're citizens. But I was always afraid to apply for status. And then the laws changed. And she looked at me desperately. I couldn't risk my family, Mr. Carter. I couldn't risk being sent back to a country I barely remember. No one is going to deport you, Chen said firmly. Not because of this. I give you my word. Rachel studied the detective's face for a long moment. Then took a shaky breath. I knew something was wrong, she said. From the beginning, I knew. The food disappeared too fast. Bread, cheese, canned things, enough for 3 or 4 people when there were only 2 in the house. And I found clothes sometimes. Small clothes, Benjamin's size, hidden in the laundry. Mr. Daniel said they were old things he was sorting through. But they weren't old. They were worn. Recently worn. What else? I asked. The library. Rachel's voice dropped. Mr. Daniel kept it locked when I cleaned. He said there were confidential case files he couldn't risk being disturbed. But sometimes, when I was working nearby, I heard things. What kinds of things? Tapping, like someone knocking on a wall. And once, she pressed her hand to her mouth. Once I heard a voice. Very faint, very muffled. It said help. Just that one word. Help. The room was silent. Why didn't you tell anyone? Chen asked. Because I told Mr. Daniel what I heard. Rachel's face contorted with guilt. I thought he should know. I thought maybe there was an animal trapped somewhere, or a problem with the pipes. He thanked me for telling him. He said he would take care of it. And then he told me that if I ever mentioned it again to anyone, he would make sure I never worked in this country again. Rachel's testimony continued for 2 hours. Detective Chen recording every word. She described the small signs she had noticed over 5 years. The extra food, the locked doors, the sounds in the night. She talked about Daniel's behavior, his careful management of appearances, his occasional slips that he always explained away with smooth lies. He was always watching, Rachel said, always listening. I learned to be careful around him, to never ask questions, to pretend I didn't notice things that seemed wrong. Tell me about the night Eleanor died, Chen prompted. Rachel hesitated. I wasn't there that night, but I was there the next morning. Mr. Daniel called me very early 6 o'clock and asked me to come clean before anyone else arrived. He said there had been an accident, that his mother had fallen, that the house needed to be ready for visitors. Did you find anything unusual? The carpet at the bottom of the stairs. Rachel's voice was barely audible. It had been replaced. The pattern was the same, but the carpet was new. I could tell because the edges hadn't been worn down yet. Chen leaned forward. The carpet was replaced overnight? Before the police investigation? Rachel nodded. Mr. Daniel said the original was stained with blood. He said he couldn't bear to look at it. He said he had called a carpet company at midnight and paid extra for emergency service. She paused. I didn't question it then. Mrs. Carter had just died. Everything seemed like chaos. But later, I wondered, why would he replace evidence from a crime scene? Because it wasn't just blood, I said slowly. There was something else on that carpet. Something that would have told the police this wasn't an accident. Fibers, Chen said. Hair. DNA. Evidence of a struggle. By replacing the carpet before the investigation, Daniel destroyed anything that might have contradicted his story. We sat in silence, absorbing the implications. There's one more thing, Rachel said quietly. Something I've never told anyone. We waited. About a year after Benjamin disappeared, I was cleaning Mr. Daniel's bathroom. He had left some papers on the counter. He was usually so careful about those things. But this time he had forgotten. I glanced at them. Just for a second. What did they say? It was a medical receipt. For sedatives. A large quantity enough for months. The patient name was listed as J. Blake. But the address. Rachel looked at me with haunted eyes. The address was your house. Mr. Carter, your son was buying sedatives for someone who lived in your home. Under a name that doesn't exist. Rachel left with Detective Chen's assurance that she would be protected from Daniel, from immigration authorities, from any retaliation. I sat alone in Helen's living room as the sun began to set, thinking about everything I had learned. The receipts, the will, the witnesses, the 5 years of signs that I had been too blind to see. But one question still haunted me. Why? Why had Daniel done this? What possible reason could justify imprisoning his own brother, forcing him to write novels, keeping him in darkness while pretending to search for him? The answer came to me slowly, pieced together from Eleanor's notes, from James's testimony, from Rachel's observations. It was about the inheritance. Eleanor's will, the original one, had split the estate equally between the two brothers. But Eleanor had other assets beyond the house and savings. A trust fund, established by her parents, worth several $1 million, that would only be distributed upon her death. Under the terms of the trust, if one beneficiary was deceased or missing, their share would transfer to the surviving beneficiary. By making Benjamin disappear, Daniel had positioned himself to claim the entire trust. And by keeping Benjamin alive barely, secretly, trapped, he had ensured a constant source of income through the Jonathan Blake novels. It was monstrous in its efficiency. Daniel had transformed his brother into a ghost who could neither inherit nor escape, whose talent could be exploited indefinitely, whose existence could be denied to the world while being maintained just enough to keep the profits flowing. My phone rang, shattering my thoughts. Mr. Carter. Mike Torres's voice was tense. I'm outside your house. I've been watching since this morning. Like you asked. Something's happening. What is it? Daniel came home early. He went straight to the library and hasn't come out. But I can hear him through the window. He's talking to someone. Yelling. It sounds like he's figured out that someone's been in his files. My blood ran cold. I'm on my way. I ran to my car, my heart pounding. If Daniel knew we had discovered his secret, if he had any suspicion that the walls were closing in, what would he do to Benjamin? I called Detective Chen from the car. We need to move now, I said. Daniel knows something's wrong. If he destroys the evidence, if he hurts Benjamin. Thomas, slow down. Chen's voice was calm but urgent. We can't just break into the house without a warrant. Everything we've gathered will be useless if we don't do this properly. My son is in danger. I understand. But if we rush this, Daniel walks free. Is that what you want? I forced myself to take a breath. Chen was right. I had spent 32 years in the justice system. I knew how cases could be destroyed by improper procedure, how guilty men could walk free because of technicalities. Daniel was a criminal defense attorney. He would exploit every possible weakness in our case. How long for a warrant? I've already started the process. With the evidence we have, the financial records, the witness testimony, Eleanor's notes, I can have something by tomorrow morning, but I need you to stay away from the house tonight. Can you do that? I thought of Benjamin, trapped behind that wall, possibly knowing that Daniel was suspicious, possibly fearing that his rescue would never come. I'll stay at Helen's, I said, but I want officers watching the house. If Daniel tries to run, I'll have 2 units in position within the hour. No one leaves that house without us knowing. I drove to Helen's and found her waiting on the porch, a leather-bound journal clutched to her chest. "Thomas," she said as I approached, "I need to show you something. Something I should have shown you years ago." We went inside, and Helen spread the journal on her dining room table. It was filled with handwritten entries, dated over the past 5 years, observations, concerns, questions she had never dared to voice. "I started keeping this after Eleanor died," Helen explained. "I told myself it was just a diary, a way to process my grief. But I was really documenting what I saw at your house. The strange hours Daniel kept, the deliveries that came at night, the sounds I heard when the wind was still." I turned the pages slowly, reading entries that painted a damning picture. March 28th. Year 1. Saw Daniel's car in the driveway at 4 a.m. Library lights on. Unknown visitor, April 15th. Year 1. Daniel made 3 trips to the grocery store in one day. Carried bags inside at 1:30 a.m. June 22nd. Year 1. Heard hammering from the Carter house. Daniel said he was installing new shelves, but it sounded like it came from underground. October 31st. Year 2. No Halloween decorations at the Carter house. Thomas used to love Halloween. The house feels dead. And then, near the middle of the journal, an entry that stopped my heart. August 9th. Year 3. Heard shouting from the Carter house tonight. Only Daniel's voice, but he was speaking as if someone else was there. Through the library window, I could see him gesturing, arguing with someone I couldn't see. The entries continued, growing more detailed and more disturbing as the years passed. Helen had documented everything, the late-night movements, the mysterious deliveries, the sounds that shouldn't have been there. She had even, it turned out, installed a security camera aimed at my house 2 years earlier. I told myself it was for safety, she admitted. Charleston has had break-ins in the neighborhood, but really, I wanted to know what was happening. I wanted proof that I wasn't losing my mind. "You have recordings?" Helen nodded and retrieved a laptop from her study. 47 nights over the past 2 years. I only recorded when I saw something unusual, but what I captured. She opened a video file dated 18 months ago. The footage was grainy, shot in night vision, but clear enough to show Daniel emerging from the back door of my house at 2:23 a.m. He was carrying a large black garbage bag, heavy enough that he struggled with the weight. He walked to the garden shed, unlocked it, and disappeared inside for approximately 10 minutes. When he emerged, the bag was gone. "What was in the bag?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. "I don't know. But there are 46 more recordings just like this one. Daniel visits that shed at least once a week, sometimes more. And the bags he carries in never come back out." Another video, from 8 months ago, showed Daniel standing at the library window at 3 a.m. He appeared to be talking not on a phone, but directly at the wall. His hands moved in animated gestures, his expression shifting between anger and something that looked almost like tenderness. "He's talking to Benjamin," I realized. Through the wall. That's what I thought too. Helen clicked to another file. But this one is different. This one has audio. The recording was from just 6 months ago. The camera's microphone had picked up Daniel's voice, thin and distant but audible. "I don't understand why you're being difficult. I've given you everything you need. Food, shelter, purpose. Do you know how many people would kill for the success you've had? 5 bestsellers, Benjamin. 5. And all you had to do was write. A pause. Then, faintly, another voice muffled, as if coming from deep underground. Let me go. Please. I can't do this anymore. You can and you will. Daniel's voice hardened. You owe me this. You owe our family. Mother's death was expensive, and someone has to pay for it. The recording ended. Helen and I sat in silence, the weight of those words pressing down on us like a physical force. Daniel had just confessed to Eleanor's murder, to Benjamin's imprisonment, to 5 years of exploitation, and Helen had captured it all on video. There's one more recording, Helen said quietly. One I've never been able to watch all the way through. She clicked on a file dated 5 years ago. March 15th, the night Eleanor died. The footage began at 11:43 p.m., the timestamp matching exactly with the time Daniel had called me to report the accident. The back door of my house opened, and Daniel emerged, moving quickly. He walked to the garden shed, unlocked it with a key from his pocket, and disappeared inside. The camera's angle couldn't capture what happened next, but the audio picked up sounds scraping, thumping, something heavy being moved. At 11:47 p.m., Daniel emerged. He was dragging something behind him, something wrapped in thick plastic, something approximately 6 feet long. Dear God, I breathed. The plastic-wrapped shape was unmistakably human, and based on the size, the build, the way it moved, or rather, didn't move, I knew what it had to be. A body. Daniel dragged the bundle across the lawn and around the side of the house, out of the camera's view. When he reappeared 3 minutes later, his hands were empty. The ambulance arrived at 11:58, Helen said, her voice shaking. I remember because I was watching from my window. But Thomas, if Eleanor was being taken to the hospital, then what was in that bag? I thought about the timeline. The call at 11:43, the ambulance at 11:58, and in between, Daniel, disposing of something, someone in the garden, evidence. I said slowly. He was disposing of evidence. Something or someone who could prove that Eleanor's death wasn't an accident. But the only other person in the house was... We looked at each other. The same horrible thought forming in both our minds. Thomas, Helen whispered. What if Daniel wasn't alone when he killed Eleanor? What if someone saw what happened? And what if that someone has been locked in your basement ever since the perfect witness who can never testify? Benjamin. Benjamin had been there the night Eleanor died. Benjamin had seen everything. And Daniel had been keeping him alive for 5 years, not just to write novels, but to ensure that the only witness to his mother's murder could never speak. The morning of the raid, Helen handed me one final piece of evidence. I found this 3 years ago, she said, pressing a manila envelope into my hands. It appeared in my mailbox with no return address, no note, just this. Inside was a manuscript. 312 pages of single-space text, handwritten in Benjamin's distinctive script. The title page read, Asterisk, The Prison of Blood Times, by Benjamin Carter. Not Jonathan Blake. Benjamin Carter. My son's real name. Where did this come from? I asked. I think Benjamin smuggled it out somehow, Helen said. I turned to the first page and began to read. Asterisk. If you're reading this, I'm either dead or still trapped. My brother Daniel has kept me prisoner in our family home since March 27th, 5 years ago. He killed our mother. He stole my work. He erased my existence. This manuscript is my testimony, my confession, and my desperate hope that anyone will believe the truth. Asterisk. The manuscript detailed everything the night of Eleanor's murder. Benjamin's confrontation with Daniel, his imprisonment, the years of forced writing. It named names, described locations, provided details that only someone who had lived through the horror could know. But more than that, it was a work of devastating literary power. Benjamin had poured 5 years of suffering into these pages, transforming his trauma into art, creating something beautiful from the darkest chapter of his life. No wonder his novels had been bestsellers. They were written by a man who understood suffering not from imagination, but from experience. "This is enough," Detective Chen said when I showed her the manuscript later that morning. "Combined with everything else, the financial records, the witness testimony, Helen's recordings, we have more than enough for a warrant." "How long?" "Judge Whitmore is reviewing the application now. We should have authorization within the hour." I paced Helen's living room, watching the clock, counting the minutes until I could finally bring my son home. At 4:47 nachmittags, Chen's phone rang. She listened for a moment, then looked at me with an expression I will never forget. "We have the warrant," she said. "It's time." The tactical briefing took place in Helen's dining room, her lace tablecloth now covered with maps of my house and photographs of Daniel. "The hidden cell is accessed through the library," Chen explained to the assembled team. 6 FBI agents, 4 Charleston PD officers, and 2 paramedics standing by. "The entrance is concealed behind a false wall. We believe the victim has been held for approximately 5 years, so expect significant physical and psychological trauma." "Rules of engagement?" one of the agents asked. "The suspect is Daniel Carter, criminal defense attorney, highly intelligent, possibly armed. He has demonstrated willingness to commit violence to protect his secrets. We take no chances, full tactical approach. Simultaneous entry through front and back doors." Chen turned to me. "Thomas, I need you to stay outside the perimeter until we've secured the scene. I know you want to be there when we find Benjamin, but your presence could complicate things. Daniel might try to use you as leverage." Every instinct in my body screamed to refuse. My son had been trapped for 5 years. I wanted to be there the moment he was freed, to be the first face he saw after all that darkness. But Chen was right. I had to trust the professionals. "I'll wait at Helen's," I agreed. "But the moment Benjamin is out, the moment it's safe, I want to see him." "You have my word." The team mobilized at 6:30 p.m., moving into position around my house as the sun began to set. From Helen's porch, I could see the FBI vehicles lining Magnolia Drive, their lights off, their agents checking weapons and reviewing entry procedures. Daniel's Mercedes was in the driveway. He was home. The waiting was unbearable. I stood at Helen's window, watching my own house like a stranger, knowing that somewhere beneath those familiar walls, my son was waiting for a rescue he might have stopped believing would ever come. At 7 p.m. exactly, Chen's voice crackled over the radio Helen had given me. "All units, execute, execute, execute." The next minutes unfolded like a nightmare I was watching from outside myself. Agents swarmed toward the house from both directions, their flashlights cutting through the evening darkness. I heard the battering ram strike the front door, 1 blow, 2, and then the sound of wood splintering as the door gave way. Shouts echoed across the lawn. "FBI! Search warrant! Everyone on the ground!" Then, silence. A long, terrible silence that seemed to stretch across years. I started walking toward the house without conscious thought. Helen called after me, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know. I needed to see. An agent intercepted me at the property line. "Sir, you can't. That's my son in there," I said, and something in my voice made him step aside. I crossed the lawn and entered my own home through the shattered front door. Agents were moving through the rooms, calling out clear zones, their flashlights sweeping across furniture I had lived with for 40 years. Chen met me in the hallway outside the library. "We found the entrance," she said. "We're cutting through the lock now." I heard it then, the high whine of a power tool, the screech of metal giving way. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, a human voice. "Hello? Is someone there? Please help me." "Benjamin." I pushed past Chen and ran to the library. The false wall stood open, revealing the narrow passage and steep staircase I had seen before. At the bottom, agents clustered around a steel door that now hung open on its hinges. Beyond the door was a room, Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, a narrow cot, a desk covered with papers, a chemical toilet in the corner, and standing in the center, blinking against the sudden brightness, was my son. Benjamin was thinner than I remembered, impossibly thin, his frame gaunt beneath a faded gray t-shirt. His hair had grown long and streaked with gray, though he was only 30. His skin was pale, almost translucent, the skin of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in years. But his eyes were the same Eleanor's eyes, my mother's eyes, the eyes of the boy who had filled notebooks with stories and dreamed of becoming a writer. Dad? His voice cracked with disbelief. Is it really you? I crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled him into my arms. He collapsed against me, shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his chest. 5 years of isolation, 5 years of darkness, 5 years of waiting. All of it poured out in that moment as I held him and whispered the words I should have said long ago. I'm here. I found you. I'm never letting you go again. The paramedics moved in eventually, gently separating us so they could check Benjamin's vital signs. He was malnourished but stable. Daniel had kept him healthy enough to write, if nothing else, small mercies in a sea of horror. As they prepared to transport him to the hospital, Benjamin gripped my hand. Daniel, he said. Where is Daniel? I looked at Chen, who shook her head. He wasn't in the house when we arrived. His car is here, but he's gone. We have units searching the neighborhood. Gone, gone, gone. Benjamin's face went pale. He knew, he whispered. Somehow he knew you were coming. He told me this morning that things might change soon, that he might have to. He couldn't finish. He might have to what? I pressed. Clean up loose ends. Benjamin's voice was barely audible. That's what he called me. A loose end. They found Daniel 2 hours later. He was at the Charleston County Airport, attempting to board a private plane to Mexico. He had withdrawn $50,000 in cash, packed a single bag, and purchased a one-way ticket under an assumed name, John Blake. A bitter irony that was lost on no one. The agents arrested him on the tarmac, his expensive suit wrinkled, his composure finally cracked. I wasn't there to see it. But Chen showed me the footage later, my son, my firstborn, being handcuffed and read his rights, while his carefully constructed life crumbled around him. They brought him back to Charleston in the early hours of the morning. I was at the hospital with Benjamin, watching my youngest son sleep under the gentle hum of monitoring equipment, when Chen called with the news. He's in custody, she said. Federal charges: kidnapping, false imprisonment, fraud, and 3 counts of suspected murder. We're still building the case on Eleanor's death, but with Benjamin's testimony and Helen's recordings, I think we can make it stick. 3 counts? I asked. Who else? His 3 pro bono clients. The elderly ones who left him money in their wills. We're exhuming the bodies for toxicology tests. My stomach turned. I had known Daniel was capable of terrible things, but the scope of his crimes was still difficult to comprehend. What happens now? Arraignment tomorrow morning. Bail hearing, though I doubt any judge will grant release given the flight risk. Then discovery, pre-trial motions, and eventually trial. Chen paused. Thomas, I need to warn you, this is going to be a media circus. A prominent attorney, a hidden prisoner, a murdered mother. The press is already gathering outside the courthouse. Let them gather, I said. I hung up and returned to Benjamin's bedside. His eyes were open, watching me. They caught him? He asked. I nodded. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he said, he'll never apologize. You know that, right? He'll never admit what he did. In his mind, he was justified. He was protecting the family name, preserving the Carter legacy, doing what needed to be done. I know, I used to hate him. Benjamin's voice was soft, contemplative. For the first year, I thought about killing him. Every time he opened that door, every time he brought food and collected pages, I fantasized about wrapping my hands around his throat. What changed? I realized something. Benjamin turned to look at me. Hatred takes energy. Energy I couldn't afford to waste. So I poured everything into the writing instead. Every ounce of anger, every drop of grief, every spark of hope. I put it all on the page. That's what kept me alive, Dad. Not hatred. Creation. I took his hand and held it tight. You're going to write again, I said. Under your own name this time. The world is going to know who Benjamin Carter really is. For the first time in 5 years. My son smiled. The next morning, I returned to the house with Detective Chen. The library had been cordoned off with yellow tape, the hidden cell now a crime scene crawling with forensic technicians. But Chen had asked me to be present for one final search, the garden shed that Daniel had kept locked for 5 years. We don't know what we'll find, she warned, as we approached. Based on Helen's recordings, Daniel used this space regularly. Whatever he was hiding, she didn't need to finish. The padlock yielded to bolt cutters, and the shed door swung open, releasing a smell of earth and chemicals that made my eyes water. Inside, the shed had been transformed. Eleanor's gardening tools were still there, pushed into the corners and covered with dust. But the center of the space was dominated by a wooden platform approximately 6 feet long, 2 feet high, draped in white cloth that had yellowed with age. On the platform, arranged with disturbing precision, were artifacts of Eleanor's life. Her reading glasses, her wedding ring, the ring I had searched for desperately after her death, a lock of silver hair tied with ribbon, and white roses, dozens of them, dried and brittle, scattered across the platform like offerings. He built a shrine, Chen said quietly. A shrine to his mother. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at the evidence of Daniel's obsession, his twisted devotion, his need to possess, even in death, the woman he had murdered. Chen's team documented everything, photographing the shrine from every angle. But it was what they found beneath the platform that would prove most damning, a leather journal filled with Daniel's handwriting, detailing 5 years of one-sided conversations with a woman who could no longer answer. She understands now, one entry read. She sees that I was right about Benjamin. He was always the weak one, the favorite, who didn't deserve her love. But now, he serves a purpose. Now he creates something worthwhile. Mother would be proud of what I've built. I closed the journal and handed it to Chen. Is this enough? I asked. Enough to convict him, combined with everything else? Yes. Daniel Carter will never see the outside of a prison again. I walked out of the shed and into the garden where Eleanor's roses had once bloomed. Most were dead now, neglected since her death. But a few stubborn bushes had survived white roses, still reaching toward the sun despite years of abandonment. I'm sorry, I whispered, to the empty garden. I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you both. A breeze stirred the surviving roses, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I felt Eleanor's presence, her warmth, her love, her forgiveness. Then the moment passed, and I was alone again, standing in the ruins of everything I had built. Benjamin spent 3 weeks in the hospital. The physical damage was significant, but treatable malnutrition, muscle atrophy, vitamin deficiencies that would take months to correct. But it was the psychological wounds that worried the doctors most. 5 years of isolation, his psychiatrist explained to me during one of our consultations. That's long enough to fundamentally alter someone's relationship with reality. He may experience flashbacks, panic attacks, difficulty trusting others. Recovery will be a long process. But Benjamin surprised everyone. From his hospital bed, he requested a notebook and pen. He wrote for hours each day, filling page after page with words that seemed to pour out of him like water from a broken dam. When the nurses tried to limit his writing time, citing the need for rest, he simply waited until they left and continued. I need to do this, he told me when I asked about it. I've spent 5 years writing to survive. Now, I need to write to heal. The manuscript he produced during those 3 weeks would eventually become his 6th novel, the first published under his real name. He called it Times the Light Behind the Wall**. And when it was released 18 months later, it would spend 47 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. But that was still in the future. In those early days, all that mattered was his recovery, his return to the world, and the trial that loomed on the horizon. "I want to testify," Benjamin said one evening, 3 days before his discharge. "Not just about what Daniel did to me, but about Mom. About everything. I want the whole world to know who he really is." "Are you sure?" I asked. "The defense will try to discredit you. They'll say the isolation damaged your memory, that you can't be trusted. Let them try." Benjamin's voice was steady, stronger than I had heard it since his rescue. "I've had 5 years to remember every detail. 5 years to write it all down. My memory isn't damaged, it's sharper than it's ever been. I looked at my son, this man who had survived the unsurvivable, who had emerged from darkness with his humanity intact, who had transformed unimaginable suffering into art, and felt a pride that brought tears to my eyes. Then we'll face them together," I said. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The prosecution's case against Daniel was overwhelming. Detective Chen had assembled a mountain of evidence, financial records tracing 5 years of fraud, witness testimony from Rachel and Helen, recordings that captured Daniel confessing to his crimes. The hidden cell beneath the library had yielded forensic evidence that corroborated Benjamin's account down to the smallest detail. But it was the evidence related to Eleanor's death that proved most devastating. Dr. Marcus Webb, the contractor who had built Benjamin's cell, was arrested 2 weeks after Daniel. Facing federal charges and the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison, he agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. His testimony revealed the full scope of Daniel's planning. "He contacted me in January," Webb told investigators, "about 4 months before Mrs. Carter died. He said he was planning a major renovation and needed someone discreet. When I asked what kind of renovation required discretion, he told me he was building a private space for a family member with special needs." Did he specify what kind of special needs? Not then. But later, after the cell was complete, he told me the truth, or part of it. He said his brother had a serious mental illness and needed to be kept somewhere safe, somewhere he couldn't hurt himself or others. He paid me to maintain the space, to install medical equipment, to keep everything running. And you believed him? Webb was quiet for a long moment. I wanted to believe him. The money was good, very good. And by the time I realized what was really happening, I was too deep. Daniel made it clear that if I ever talked, I'd go down with him. "What about Eleanor Carter? What do you know about her death?" "I know Daniel was at the hospital that night. He told me later that his mother had complicated things by surviving the fall. He asked if I knew anyone who could help with end-of-life care." Webb's voice dropped. I said no. End of life. I swear to God. I had nothing to do with her death, but I should have gone to the police. I should have stopped it. The medical records confirmed Webb's account. Eleanor had survived the initial fall, suffering severe head trauma but remaining conscious. She had been admitted to the hospital, where Daniel, using power of attorney documents he had forged months earlier, had taken control of her care. The attending physician, Dr. Rebecca Morrison, testified that she had been removed from the case at Daniel's insistence. Her replacement, a doctor named Patricia Webb, Marcus Webb's sister, had administered medication that suppressed Eleanor's respiratory function. She died at 3:47 a.m., officially from complications related to her fall. Patricia Webb had fled the country before she could be arrested. She was believed to be somewhere in South America, beyond the reach of American law enforcement. But even without her testimony, the evidence was damning enough. Daniel had not merely killed his mother. He had planned her death for months, built the infrastructure to imprison his brother, and corrupted multiple people to help him execute his scheme. It was, the prosecutor would later argue, one of the most calculated, cold-blooded murder conspiracies in the history of South Carolina. The trial of Daniel Harrison Carter began on a gray October morning, 4 months after Benjamin's rescue. The Charleston County Courthouse was surrounded by news vans and reporters, their cameras trained on every person who entered or exited. Inside, every seat in the gallery was filled journalists, lawyers, curiosity seekers, and the small group of people who had helped bring Daniel to justice. I sat in the front row with Benjamin, Helen, and Rachel. Mike Torres was there too, uncomfortable in a suit he had clearly borrowed for the occasion, but determined to see the trial through. Daniel was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled, his ankles chained. He had lost weight during his months in custody, and his hair had grown longer and grayer. But his eyes were the same cold, calculating, utterly devoid of remorse. The prosecution presented its case over 3 weeks, methodically dismantling Daniel's life piece by piece. Witnesses testified about the financial fraud, the hidden cell, the years of exploitation. Helen's recordings were played for the jury, filling the courtroom with Daniel's own voice confessing to his crimes. But it was Benjamin's testimony that proved most powerful. He took the stand on the 4th day of the 3rd week, his hands steady as he swore to tell the truth. For 6 hours, he recounted his imprisonment in excruciating detail. The darkness, the isolation, the forced writing, the psychological torture of hearing his own work praised while he rotted in a concrete box. He would read me the reviews, Benjamin told the jury. He would sit outside my cell at 2 in the morning and read every review, every award announcement, every piece of praise for Jonathan Blake. He wanted me to know that my talent was being celebrated while my existence was denied. The defense attorneys tried to discredit him, suggesting that 5 years of isolation had damaged his perception of reality. "You claim my client kept you prisoner for 5 years, the lead attorney said. Yet you produced 5 best-selling novels during that time. Doesn't that suggest you were comfortable? Well treated?" Benjamin's response silenced the courtroom. "I wrote those novels because writing was all I had. It was my only connection to the world outside that room. Every word was a prayer that someone would read it and understand that I was still alive. Comfortable? I wrote masterpieces about human suffering because I was living it. That's not comfort. That's survival." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, I held Benjamin's hand and watched Daniel's face as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Eleanor Carter, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. On the charge of kidnapping Benjamin Carter, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. On the charge of false imprisonment, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. On the charge of fraud, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. 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 Daniel's composure cracked at last. His shoulders slumped. His carefully constructed mask crumbled. And for one moment, I saw the scared little boy who had always believed that love was a competition he had to win at any cost. As they led him from the courtroom, he paused at our row. "Dad," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I did it for us, for the family. Why can't you understand that?" I met his eyes one final time. "The family you destroyed," I replied, "was never yours to protect." The sentencing hearing was held 6 weeks later. Benjamin delivered his victim impact statement with the same quiet strength he had shown throughout the trial. He spoke about the 5 years stolen from him, about the mother he had lost, about the brother who had become a stranger, wearing a familiar face. "I'm not going to tell you that I forgive you," he said, looking directly at Daniel. "Maybe someday I will. But today, I want you to know this. You failed. You tried to erase me, and I survived. You tried to steal my voice, and I'm still speaking. You tried to destroy our family, and here we are. Dad, Helen, Rachel, Mike, me standing together while you stand alone." Judge Whitmore delivered the sentence with a gravity that matched the crimes. "Daniel Harrison Carter, You have been found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. In 32 years on the bench, I have never encountered a defendant so utterly devoid of conscience, so completely consumed by narcissism, so willing to destroy the people who loved him most. For the murder of Eleanor Margaret Carter, I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the kidnapping and false imprisonment of Benjamin Thomas Carter, I sentence you to an additional 40 years, to be served consecutively. For conspiracy to commit murder, 20 years consecutive. For fraud, 10 years consecutive. You will spend the rest of your natural life behind walls, Mr. Carter, the same fate you imposed on your brother. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none left to give. The gavel fell, and Daniel was led away. He did not look back. Outside the courthouse, the November sun warmed our faces as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. Benjamin and I walked past them without responding, making our way to the quiet garden behind the old church where Eleanor and I had been married 41 years ago. Helen and Rachel joined us there, and the four of us stood in silence among the autumn roses, white roses, Eleanor's favorites. The Eleanor Carter Foundation, Benjamin said quietly, to help others who are trapped by the people who should love them most. That's what I want to build. She would be proud, I told him. Of you, of all of us. The spring sun poured through the windows of our renovated home on Magnolia Drive. The library was gone, transformed into a sunroom filled with plants and light, and the sound of birds from the garden outside. Benjamin called it the breathing room, a deliberate reclamation of the sound that had led to his rescue. 6 months had passed since Daniel's sentencing, and life was slowly returning to something resembling normal. Benjamin had published his 6th novel, the first under his real name, to critical acclaim and commercial success. The Eleanor Carter Foundation had received thousands of letters from abuse victims who had found hope in his story. On this particular morning, we had gathered in the breathing room for the Foundation's first board meeting. Mike Torres was there, uncomfortable in a borrowed tie, his daughter Maria beside him clutching a copy of Benjamin's new book. Helen and Rachel had arrived early, setting out refreshments and reviewing the agenda. Before we begin, Benjamin said, standing at the window where light streamed through the glass, I want to thank all of you. Mike, if you hadn't heard that breathing, I'd still be behind that wall. Helen, your journal and videos gave us the evidence we needed. Rachel, your courage in speaking up after 5 years of fear. He paused, his voice catching. You all saved my life. Everything that comes next, this foundation, these books, this second chance, it's because of you. Mike shuffled his feet, uncomfortable with praise. I just fixed pipes, he muttered. The rest was all of you. You listened. I corrected him. When something felt wrong, you didn't ignore it. You didn't convince yourself it was nothing. You trusted your instincts and spoke up. That's rarer than you know. The meeting continued through the afternoon, interrupted by laughter and stories and the occasional tear. Detective Chen stopped by with news that 2 more of Daniel's suspected victims had been confirmed as homicides. Daniel himself had filed his first appeal, which Chen assured us would fail. As the sun began to set, the guests departed one by one until only Benjamin and I remained in the breathing room. I've been thinking about Mom, Benjamin said quietly. About writing her story, not just what happened to her, but who she was, her life, her dreams, her love for this family. She would like that, I said. She always believed words had power. Benjamin turned to face me, his eyes clear and determined. She was right. Words saved my life. Every sentence I wrote in that cell was a thread connecting me to the world outside. And now, those words are helping others. I pulled my son into an embrace, holding him the way I should have held him 5 years ago. I'm proud of you, I whispered. Outside, Eleanor's roses swayed in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a bird began to sing. 5 years. 1,826 days of silence. That is how long my son waited behind a wall while I slept in the room above him, while I ate breakfast in the kitchen beside him, while I grieved for a disappearance that never happened. I was a federal judge. I spent 32 years separating truth from lies, guilt from innocence, justice from injustice. Yet in my own home, I saw nothing. I heard nothing. I questioned nothing. This story is not just about a monster who wore my son's face. It is about all of us, the ones who look away, who explain away, who convince ourselves that silence is safer than truth. Eleanor tried to warn me. Rachel heard the crying and said nothing. Helen watched for 5 years and waited. We were all complicit in our silence, prisoners of our own fear and denial. The most dangerous prisons are not built with concrete and soundproofing foam. They are built with the words we refuse to speak, the questions we refuse to ask, the truths we refuse to see. If this story teaches you anything, let it be this. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is. When someone seems trapped, they probably are. When a voice inside you whispers that you should speak up, listen to it. Because somewhere right now, in a house that looks just like yours, in a family that seems just like yours, someone is waiting to be heard. Do not let them wait 5 years. Do not let them wait another day. Last night, I stood in the doorway of the breathing room and watched my son write by lamplight. His pen moved across the paper with a rhythm I remembered from his childhood, when he would fill notebook after notebook with stories about brave knights and magical kingdoms. Back then, I thought his imagination was a gift. Now, I know it was his survival. Eleanor's photograph sits on his desk. Every morning, he touches it before he begins to write. Every evening, he places a white rose beneath it before he sleeps. She never got to read his novels, never got to see the writer he became, but I have to believe that somewhere, she knows. The Carter family will never be whole again. Daniel's chair sits empty at every holiday table. Eleanor's laughter no longer echoes through these halls. The innocence we once had is gone forever, but we are still here. Benjamin writes. Rachel tends the garden. Helen joins us for Sunday dinners. Mike Torres stops by whenever his work brings him to Magnolia Drive, always refusing payment, always staying for coffee. We are broken. Yes, but broken things can still hold light. And every sunrise that pours through these new windows reminds me, even after the longest night, morning always comes. Before you go, I need to ask you something. Is there a wall in your life you have been afraid to look behind? A question you have been afraid to ask? A truth you have been afraid to hear? I waited 5 years. My son paid the price for my blindness. Do not make the same mistake. Look closer. Listen harder. Speak sooner. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about someone in your life who might need help, do something about it. Today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss a story that might change a life. And leave a comment telling me, what truth have you been afraid to face? Because every story we share is a light in the darkness. Every conversation we start is a wall coming down. Every voice that speaks up is a life that might be saved. Thank you for listening to my story. Now go write your own.